So that might, there he is. Hey, Steve.
Hello, hello. Good evening to you all. I hope everybody is doing well this evening as we meet for our third session together, and we will conclude this course next Tuesday. It has been a joy. This turned into something bigger than we had originally planned, and I'm pleased for that. We had just originally envisioned these as being something distinguishable and even independent from what we were doing with the CLM curriculum. We just wanted to offer something that we thought people could benefit from, and we were in the position to present it on Zoom. And so we offered to make this available, but it wasn't going to be directly connected to CLM, not at first. We just wanted to offer some exposure for people who were going to be in charge conference. And we thought it would be helpful to have some training on these various topics. But then some of you wrote to me and asked if we could turn it into an elective. And so we thought about it more, and we thought we could package this as church leadership and administration, because there were 7 sessions. And then with the reading, it could equal a course with the same level of class time and requirements that we could attach to it. So it has become for us what will be an elective in the future, church leadership and administration. And that's the way we're going to begin to carry it forward as we move on from here. And so I thank you for that, because your interactions and feedback helped us to develop this further along than we had originally anticipated. And it has been a joy for me to begin to think more in terms of a curriculum course, because I think everybody benefits from it in that way. So we're glad to offer it that way. It has been a joy for me to dive headfirst into this and to think about it in terms of horizons. I told you from the very beginning that what we wanted to do with this is not just nuts and bolts as what you would do when you were on these respective committees, but what's your identity as you enter into these various leadership roles? How should you think of yourself in terms of the historical legacy that you're stepping into and you're representing and you're a part of? And so that's what we're bringing to this, is legacy thinking and identity thinking and perspectives and horizons to your various callings at the tasks that you've been nominated for and that you will uh, perform in your various churches. So that's what we wanted to bring to these classes, and it's more than just do this, do that. It's bringing to it something that's going to shape your overall perspective toward how you will perceive of yourself when you enter into these roles. And that's a much deeper and I think a more profound way to think about these various levels of church leadership. But having said that, I want to give Dottie a moment to bring us in alignment with where we presently are. We really took off this fall season, and we've got to kind of anchor down once in a while to catch our breath, because we have been full speed ahead. Dottie will be soon doing her third lay convocation since the fall season started. This is now our third course, and we will be moving into a fourth course starting next Saturday on November the 1st. So we've been moving full speed ahead. So let's give Dottie a minute to bring us up to date as to where we are. And for those of you who are interested in taking mission and evangelism, let me say that that would be one of the core classes. This one is an elective. If you're doing church leadership and administration, you're wanting to get some hours for it, it will count as elective hours, but it won't count toward the core requirements. The core requirements would be the spiritual formation from the Wesley perspective that we did in September, basic Bible that Cliff is doing right now in October. That would be the second one. What Richard is doing in November, Mission and Evangelism, that would be the third one. When we get to the spring, Kerry Wood will be teaching uh, doctrines, history, and polity. That would be your fourth. And the fifth would be congregational care, which we'll be offering next May. In addition to those core classes, there will be two additional electives in the spring for those of you who are interested. Earl Bradshaw will be teaching preaching in February, and we're really glad to bring Earl back into what we're doing. He offered a refresher course for us back in May, and it's so really a pleasure to have him back with us in February. And I will be offering a course on Wesleyan theology in April, and it will count as an elective. So we're mixing, throwing some things in there for people that want to expand their knowledge and, increase their exposure to some more topics. But if you're wanting to focus on those core requirements, you can knock down a couple of them this semester, knock out three of them actually, with spiritual formation, basic Bible, and mission and evangelism. And then the other two would be Kerry Wood's doctrine, history, and polity, and then the one on congregational care in May. You knock out those five, and you will be able to have finished the CLM course requirements by the end of the spring. You will have completed the educational requirements. We set it up that way so that those who wanted to begin in September could finish the educational requirements by May. And we were very intentional with that. Now, when we hit the ground next year, we hope to figure in some more electives, bring in some additional courses, and we will offer, of course, the core for people who are new and coming in, but we will also continue to introduce some new courses as we continue to move through this. So just a glimpse of some things that we have in your future. But Dottie, give us an update on where we are, and particularly with mission and evangelism. How many are registered for Richard's class so far? Because registration will close on that sometime next week.
Yeah, I believe that I checked last night and there were, I think, 29 registered for Richard's class so far. And so there is still, plenty of room. And I don't know how he will handle, um, dividing the class up as far as being able to talk or use the chat or whatever. I told him what um, Steve has done and what Cliff has done in his class. So, but that'll be up to Richard. So go to the conference website if you want to register and go to events. And I think it's the second one down that talks about the classes and stuff that you can take. So it is very worthwhile. So go ahead and get registered. They're going to be on Saturday mornings from 9 to 11, the first 4 Saturdays in November. So that will avoid Thanksgiving weekend, and you'll be through before then. And then we're going to take a little bit of a break, but come back in the spring hot and heavy with lots of classes, and hopefully you'll be able to participate in some of those. And one of the things I still want to stress, if you have missed something, if you didn't take spiritual formation, there are other conferences that you can use to take the class, and they offer it in different ways. Some are like a full day on Saturday, some are like what we are doing, with multiple classes in the evenings. But there are other options out there. You just will need to make sure that you get your certificate when you finish and keep track of that. But you don't have to wait until next year if you miss something this year and you're pursuing certified lay ministry as a beginner. And I will encourage too, I think that registration for the convocation this weekend closes tonight. So if you are interested in going to the convocation in Washington, North Carolina, That is also on the conference website and the newsletter. So please get your registrations in so that they can count for lunch. Whatever's I missed.
Yeah, and that is a very good piece of information for them to know that if you aren't able to accommodate your schedule to something we're offering, you can take anything offered in any other conference and it's transferable. And if you would rather do something, say, through Hood Seminary, which here is in North Carolina, is offering a GMC curriculum, those courses would be transferable as well. Now you would have to pay for those, although I do think there's some grant money available for those courses if you're interested, and you could draw from that grant money if you wanted to take those, and you could use those to meet some of these requirements, because a lot of those courses are very much in alignment with what we're doing as well. So there's a lot of options out there, and so people have asked, well, why is the schedule for CLM, kind of all over the place? I'm doing Tuesday evenings predominantly. Cliff's doing Sunday evenings, and Richard's doing Saturday mornings. When Earl does his course in February, it will be a Saturday morning course. Kerry Woods will be, I do believe, a Thursday evening course. When I do mine in April, it will be a Tuesday evening, because Tuesday evenings are more accessible for me. Um, I believe when Cliff does, he's going to be doing congregational care in May, and he's going to go back to Sunday evenings. That seems to have worked well for him. And the reason simply is, if we want to get these instructors that are highly gifted and highly capable, then we have to let them teach when they have the opportunity to. I mean, all of us have multiple things going on, and we wear a lot of different hats in the denomination and in our districts and in the conference. And I do a lot more than just CLM, and Cliff does a lot more than what he does for us. And Earl's a general conference representative, and he's preparing for that. And so basically, we've just told people, if you're a gifted teacher, we want you, and we are willing to offer the class when you can teach it. And so if it is not during a time that you can accommodate, then we will help you in finding one that will, in one of our partnering conferences, that you would be able to find something very comparable, or through Hood Seminary.
I
Dottie,
will
was there
add
anything?
too, I'm sorry, I wanted to add too that when you get ready to apply, we still don't have the application on the website. Hopefully that will happen fairly soon. But if you want to look at it ahead of time, I'd be glad to email it to you. But again, go ahead and get your approvals from your pastor, your charge conference, and your SPRC committee this fall, so that you're not having to wait, because you cannot get an interview with the Board of Ministry until you have all those pieces in place. And keep track of your certificates. I will send them out for the classes that you're taking in North Carolina, but, make sure that you get them if you take them from another conference also, because all of those are going to have to be attached to your application. So there's a lot of paperwork and stuff, and I'm going to ask that if you are new and not transferring, that you hold off sending any information to me until it is complete. So I'm not getting a charge conference this week and a SPRC next week from 60 people. That would be very helpful.
That would be, and I just need to pause and commend Dottie once again. When you wonder who was our registration office, well, it's basically Dottie. She is our registration office, and she takes care of all of this registration. She takes care of the certificates. She advises students in terms of where they are in the process, and I just have to salute her. I've said before, I think that she is an angel sent from above. I don't think she's human. And I'm still convinced of that. You won't convince me otherwise. She is just amazing, and I don't know what I'd be without her. All this stuff behind the scenes, and just does a tremendous job doing it. And not only that, but also keeping up with these lay convocations, which is something distinguished from CLM. And she's also on the committee just for lay ministry in general, which is something different from what CLM is. So she is just wearing multiple hats all over the place. And I am just so blessed to have her as my right arm.
You're
Well,
very
tonight
kind.
what we're looking at is a couple things. The Lay Nominations Committee and the Staff Parish Relations Committee. That goes back a little ways, but one that I think you would benefit from, and it's a book that I think you would benefit from to read as a leadership team in various leadership roles, but certainly on the nominations team or the SPRC. It's a little book called Watching Over One Another in Love, and it's only 80 pages, but the subtitle is A Wesleyan Model for Ministry Assessment. A Wesleyan Model for Ministry Assessment. And in this book, there are sample ministry assessments that you can use to follow. It just offers very helpful guides and examples of things that you could utilize in your churches as you're thinking through the kind of people that you would want to nominate, and in the terms of how you do assessments and ministry assessments for Staff Parish Relations Committee. When we are talking about these two things tonight, they're very closely related. One is going to be in the position of how we nominate and the criteria that we bring to the table in our reflections, in our thinking together in terms of the right people for the right roles. And when you're on the SPRC, you're thinking of how you serve as the intermediary between congregation and pastor, and how you are that bridge between the two, and offering encouragement and upbuilding and feedback that pastors and staff ministers can benefit from, that they can grow from, and that they can continue to advance and increase for the betterment of the church as a whole. So both of these are going to be very important for us, and we will dive into the first one, what is the nominations committee and the GMC. But before we do, let's open with prayer tonight and ask God to make our time together fruitful. Let's pray. Gracious Lord, thank you for all of these people who are with us this beautiful Tuesday evening. Thank you for what you've given us tonight as we gather here. I pray that it has been a restful and renewing evening for everyone who is here, and that the evening is filled with serenity, and that we can enjoy a conversation that will yield a return and a bountiful harvest. We pray that though our time tonight will only be a couple of hours, that it will yield dividends that will far outweigh the time that is measured by clocks, but that we can carry forward returns that will be the gift that keeps on giving. So may it be larger than what we put in, and may it be multiplied and expanded in ways that we can't think, dream, or even comprehend. We give all this to you tonight, and we pray that all that we do and say will glorify you. In your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Okay. Well, let me give you two sets of page numbers rather than one, because we found out last week, since I was working from the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines that I had printed out, that it was not corresponding to the hard copy that some of you have that you ordered from Seedbed. So I've got both sets of page numbers for you tonight. First section we're looking at, what is the nominations committee in the GMC, is section 444. And it is page 49 to 50 in the online version that you print off like I did, or it will be 102 to 103 if you have the copy from Seedbed. but both of those fall under section 444, and that's what we're working from tonight. Now, first thing I want to say right from the start about the nominations committee in the GMC or in any Wesleyan format in recent years is that it will resemble in spirit, but not in structure, what Wesley originally formulated. Because let's be direct here and forthright, Wesley personally appointed the people that were in his roles. There was no nomination committee as such. He personally appointed the preachers, the society leaders, the class leaders, the band leaders, the stewards. Wesley was meticulous in his involvement, certainly received feedback, but he was the one that personally appointed people. And it was only after his death that things moved into a different kind of approach in terms of how leaders were matched up to their respective roles. But Wesley felt it very important to be directly invested into the ministries that were going on. And he was certainly open to feedback and drawing upon the assessment of people who were receiving that ministry, but he directly appointed those roles. So when we're looking at the nominations committee, we're looking at something that will resemble in spirit what Wesley presented, but not in structure. I will say this, that nearly all the society leaders that Wesley put into place, nearly all of them were lay people. They were disciples who made disciples. And I will say that, as we've noted throughout, that under all of these respective positions in the GMC, the phrase that is continually repeated, and it is repeated once again under section 444, is that the representatives who will be on this committee, here's what they will do. First and foremost, they shall engage in biblical and theological reflection on the mission of the church. That's what it says. And we've already seen that same statement is under a lay leader. It is under people who will represent council. And now we're going to see it on the nominations committee. We're going to see it on the SBRC. We will see it again next week when we look at trustees and finance. Shall engage in biblical and theological reflection on the mission of the church. And of course, that goes over and above and beyond just the reflection of the first section of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, where you familiarize yourself with our Wesleyan heritage and our classical Orthodox heritage. That what our Book of Doctrines and Discipline does is that when you are involved in any task of church leadership, whatever form it takes, lay leader, council, nominations, SBRC, trustees, finance, it is vital, it's critical that you formulate biblical understanding as to who you are and what you're about, and your identity as what you bring to the role. It should form and transform the way that you view the work that you do. You shall engage in biblical and theological reflection on the mission of the church. That's church, capital C, the larger calling that we all represent, in addition to your respective congregation, lowercase c, what you're doing particularly in that congregation. Now, the image that I gave you in my presentation notes is that the committee that is the nominations committee, I think a very helpful image for you to carry with this is that it is the greenhouse of leadership. That's what it is, because it is there where you are developing leaders. You're developing there because it is here where you are prayerfully reflecting as a team on the integrity, the faithfulness, the transparency, the spiritual maturity of the people that you are considering for crucial positions in church life. It's no small thing. Now, I've been in ministry for 3 decades now, over 3 decades, and I've been in it long enough, as some of you can attest. I've been in it long enough to have horror stories. Y'all have some horror stories. I've been in it long enough to know what happens when you nominate the wrong people. Yeah. Have y'all had some blow up on you? Oh, and I got to take it. I've got to confess that I'm sharing a lot of things with you from past woundedness and things that I still need therapy for because I've learned from glaring mistakes where I have just uh, detonated the building all around us. I said last week that when we go to nominate lay leaders, when we go to nominate people who are going to be the people representing your council chair, don't think, oh, this person was successful as a lawyer, therefore they'd make a wonderful lay leader. This person was the principal of one of our largest high schools in our county. They would make a wonderful council chair. I've thought that way. I have reasoned that way, and I have had those kind of placements blow up all around me, as you probably have stories very similar. Uh, what Wesley would say is that a person may very well be successful in their line of work, but that was not the criteria that Wesley put when he went out to look for who would be good to lead a society, a class, or a band. He was looking for spiritual maturity. He was looking for integrity. He was looking for transparency. He was looking for somebody who had a service oriented character to their life where they were willing to take up the basin and the towel. And so if they had gifts in their line of work, in their occupation, in their careers, well, they had Wesley's blessing, and you may very well be able to carry some of those gifts over. But those weren't the predominant core characteristics that Wesley started his evaluations from. And I have learned the hard way. I have, and I'm sharing with you my own woundedness so you don't have to repeat it, that you don't want to begin your discussions there from where they are, where their careers, where their occupations, where they were with their vocations. People bring their giftedness and talent to the church, and we can benefit from it, and we should utilize it. But when you're putting people in critical leadership roles, they need to have critical spiritual leadership qualities. And I will say that for Wesley, even though he was the one who appointed these positions, he did advocate a communal spirit led process, pastor and lay in conversation, in interaction, in partnership. And this should be a shared uh, means of grace. Remember, we've already talked about that. We led with that. And when you get conversations started with Christian conferencing, transforming things happen. Spiritual miracles happen when you hear things, discover things, uh, consider things that you wouldn't have otherwise even considered because the Spirit is rushing in and means of grace is streaming and your horizons are widening because of this shared process. You know what's interesting to me is that prominent people in church history, like George Whitefield, for example, when he commented on what Wesley's biggest impact was, do you know what George Whitefield said? And here was a person, mind you, that admired Wesley and his preaching. He admired it highly. But do you know what Whitefield said was Wesley's biggest, most critical, most important impact? It was how Wesley empowered the lay and the way that he strategically and structurally brought them in to his movement in a way that fostered it and propelled it to greater and greater heights. Whitefield said, without compare, that was Wesley's largest, most influential impact, was the way that he strategically utilized the lay. Get a preacher in the 19th century like Henry Ward Beecher, one of the greatest preachers, not just of the 19th century, but of all time. He echoed Whitefield and said the same thing. Henry Ward Beecher said Wesley's greatest and most important impact was the way that he strategically organized and formulated lay people into ministry. Dwight L. Moody, another one in the 19th century, he was another one that reinforced what Whitefield and Beecher said. Wesley's use of lay people was revolutionary for his time, and it has created a precedent that we can then build on and create structures around. As I say, we're going to align in spirit with what Wesley did. The structures we build from it are going to take his thinking, and then we're going to build structures around it, around the way the church functions today. But it was systematic organization, and that much is true. And the way that Wesley utilized it for the upbuilding and reinforcement of lay people who were in critical positions, you have to put careful thought into the right person for the right role. Kevin Watson, if I might go back to something he said recently, he believes, and I agree with him, that we have lost social holiness and scriptural holiness because we have lost the empowerment of the laity. And do you know what Kevin Watson says is the principal cause of this? We have moved from transformation to information. That's right. He says what we have done is we have made clergy the supreme professionals, experts, and they are going to be the in-house papacy. And when they come in, you kiss their signet ring and you listen to what they have to say. And the lay people just fall in place as spectators. It's become a theater, and we are the showman. And Kevin Watson says this has led to the erosion of Wesley's dream of lay empowerment. The lay have moved from transformation to information. They have moved from active participants to passive spectators. And Watson says until we change that, and until we move back to their transformative role of empowering them, we will not recover social holiness and scriptural holiness in a way that Wesley was able to drive, because his secret was the way that he utilized Ephesians 4. You know what he did with that scripture? Living out the truth of faith that you cultivate in a community. Ephesians 4, collective transformation. That scripture in Ephesians 4, living out the truth of faith that you cultivate in a community, that was the secret. There was no formal nominations committee, and it's important to note that. But we can say that we anticipate the same goal, because what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to empower the laity, not information, transformation. We want to put them into roles where they are going to be part of the partnership of the engine, not spectators, but they are going to be the shared partners in this collective enterprise where we are being formed and transformed together. Now, your nominations committee, why it's so critical, as you see in Book of Doctrines and Disciplines in section 444, you're nominating the lay leader, you're nominating the church council chair, you're nominating the SBRC chair, you're nominating the finance chair, you're nominating the trustee chair. You look at those positions alone, and that is going to constitute some critical decision making. And as I noted last week, when we disaffiliated, we found out how pivotal those roles are. You had the wrong people in those roles, it was an uphill climb to try to get people to align with what a pastor may have been trying to lead as a shepherd, to align with doctrine and to align with classical orthodoxy. We found out how crucial those roles were. And if you did not have spiritual, scripturally mature people in those critical, pivotal roles who could work in partnership with pastors, then you had round pegs going into square holes. And we saw that some of those churches either had a very difficult time getting out or they weren't able to, because they just were not in harmony with each other. They were in disharmony. Now, how you arrange this committee will be in large part how big your church is and the size of your church. But in general, the Book of Doctrines and Discipline advocates for a 9-member committee. And it should be representative of your congregation, ages, races, ethnicity, socioeconomic, as I mentioned last week. And if you have contemporary and traditional services, it should be a good representation of those two styles of worship. But the top concern that you should have when you fill this position is that you need people who are discerning of what it means to be a leader, and they have keen and astute knowledge of their congregation. They know people and they know their spiritual maturity, and they're going to get together collectively, forming and transforming. And they're not going to be saying, well, Steve was a good high school principal, let's make him council chair. They're going to say, Steve could be a good attorney, but what's his scriptural orthodoxy? Is he spiritually mature? Do you sense from him that he has a service mentality? Do you sense from him that he has a passion for Christ likeness? I might be able to use my legal gifts. I might be able to use my accounting gifts. I might be able to use my coordinating gifts from my career. But if I'm not spiritually mature, all of those other things will be undercut ultimately, because I will not have the right harmonization with the goals of the church as a whole. Well, more could be said there, but I want to open it up for you. What are you thinking this evening about this critical committee, and how it aligns with Wesley's spirit? Not necessarily the structure of what Wesley had in the 18th century, but very much spiritually, you see the right tone that the Book of Doctrines and Discipline is trying to advocate there, as we look back historically and think about how it would look today. Let's give first opportunity to our CLM candidates. What's on your mind this evening? What leaps out at you on this topic? Thoughts? Do y'all feel like spectators in your church? Do you feel like you're watchers in a theater? Or do you feel like you are really being invited, embraced, ignited, uh, encouraged, and urgently incited in some cases, where you are taught that you have a place here that we cannot function without? What are you hearing in your respective churches? Because Kevin Watson believes that there is an epidemic in Methodism, where we are unintentionally sometimes letting the pastor be the in-house expert while everybody else watches on the sidelines. Dottie, what are you thinking this evening?
I think one of the things that we have to be concerned with for nominations and stuff is that people that serve on that committee really need to have a good gauge of um, observing and seeing what people's talents are, where their natural abilities go to, not only what their calling might be and their spirituality in the matter, but you don't want to put somebody in finance that can't balance a checkbook, I mean, stuff like that. So, but and I think most churches do a pretty good job on that, but a lot of times in smaller churches, I hear that sometimes that people get nominated just because they would say yes.
Right, right, that's right. And I think it was my good friend Pastor Dan that asked last week. Is Dan with us tonight, by the way? Dan, are you here? Let me see. Oh yeah, you're here. I see you.
Yeah.
Dan asked last week about uh, lay qualifications and how it's difficult. I mean, to carry that Forbes list of 20 qualities of a leader and think, wow, this is about as much as we put on a pastor. I mean, how many people can live up to this? I don't live up to the list of the 20 leadership qualities that Forbes we talked about in Forbes magazine last week. And so I think you've got to work with what you have. You do, and Jesus worked with what he had. I don't think any of his 12 disciples would have passed the Forbes test at all. And Jesus was okay with that. He didn't call the qualified; he qualified the call, and we are all encouraged by that, aren't we? I know I am very encouraged by it that God takes my inability and gross incompetence and can inspire and gift it and do all kinds of wondrous things through it. So I mean, there is a case where we work with what we do have, and we know that we're going to be sorting through some things with the best that we have available, but we're hoping we can grow and advance with that and teach and disciple, and the best place where you can do your recruiting is not while you're at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, but you can do your best recruiting when you're in Bible study or when you're in your small group prayer or when you are in your women's ministries group and you're doing prayer request time and you get a sense from Steve, you're thinking, wow, I really appreciated how he prayed for them. I could sense that he's got a spiritual depth about him. He's been through some stuff and he had some wisdom. And I don't know about his trustee skills, but I do know that he's spiritually minded and he thinks like a good steward. And maybe we can use that on the trustees committee. One of the blowbacks that I had in my own past was that we had an immensely talented man who ran a very large and prominent construction company. And everybody thought, boy, he would just be great on trustees. He would be great, running our trustees and put him as the chair because nobody knows more about engineering or we got to go out and get bids. Nobody knows what things should cost because I mean he's done it. And so that became our criteria, and we put that person in the role. And there came a disagreement with the trustees, and it led to a very ugly, decisive divisive kind of argument. And his spiritual immaturity really showed. He ended up quitting. He ended up walking away, and it was just a severe learning experience for me and for everybody else was that we should have never, ever done that. We should have never let that be our guiding criteria. Yes, he was a good construction manager. Yes, he ran a successful company, uh, but he was not the right person for the trustees. And he was not even the right person to be on the trustees, much less even serve as the council, serve as the chair. That's just one example of something I've learned from. And I think that what Wesley would advocate is that he led his conversations with what's the person's integrity? What's their faithfulness? What's their transparency? What's their scriptural alignment? What's their sense of service mentality? And let that be your primary reflection. And then secondarily, can they balance a checkbook? Do they know about construction bids? Would they be good with legal advice? That would be your secondary questions. And too often, I think they tend to be the predominant questions when we need to make them secondary. But as I say, I mean, we are dealing with limited prospects sometimes in churches, and you have to do the best you can with what you have and know that, hey, Jesus does a lot through people, and I can attest for that. And you hope that as you move along, you're discipling one another and you're growing together, and faults, flaws, and foibles, and all the rest of it, you're moving together faithfully. Um, but choose the best that you can, and leave the rest to good grace to uh, fill in those gaps when we're certainly not capable of that. Dottie, did you have anything further you wanted to add to that? Or did that address your
I
concern?
think it does, and I just think that I know that Linda put a comment that her church in the past had been just filling the slots in a good old boys club. And, I hope that we are getting past some of that. So, trying to put people in positions that are good developmentally for them, but also are good for the church and the congregation, that they are in the right spot as they should be, that it is spirit led and not just something that, somebody thinks that they ought to do. So I know that previous church that I belonged to, there were a lot of there were like three families that pretty much dominated the entire church, and at least one of them was on every single committee. And so it was hard.
It is, and that's why this particular group of leadership is so critical for a church, because as you can see, it's the greenhouse from where leadership will either blossom or it will die on the vine. And I've seen both. I've seen both. I've seen it when the greenhouse is effective and it nurtures and nourishes and cultivates and prunes and brings to form the seed bed into a flourishing orchard. And I've seen others where it just withers on the vine, and you're thinking that should have never happened. Oh, I'm going to nominate Joe for SPRC because he's a good friend of mine. Good old boy mentality, good old girl mentality. I mean, however form it takes, it's the same uh, pitfall and the same landmine if you're not careful. Uh, and that's why what I appreciate about the Book of Doctrines and Discipline is that before it starts talking about nuts and bolts, do this on the committee, here's how you do this task, shall engage in biblical and theological reflection on the mission of the church. That really should be the first and foremost way that we guide all of these respective roles. And if we did that, and if we followed that as our uh, foundation, I think we could alleviate a lot of problems on the front end even before we confront them. Preventive medicine, if you will, rather than treating it when the ailment arises. It's much better to try to prevent it on the front end. And if you're engaging in biblical and theological work on the front end, some of these things can be shielded from the very get go. Um, but that being said, we are working in an imperfect community with imperfect people, imperfect pastors, and all of us together are throwing ourselves at the mercy of God's grace, knowing that that's what we need. Um, and we're going to do the best we can with who we can. but always holding out, at least as our guiding goal, is we need to reach for the best that we can possibly attain. Dennis and Denise, one or the other or both? What are you thinking this evening?
All right, you got a question?
A couple of years ago, I had this vision of where our church was, and it was very immature, spiritually. So I came with a good idea, I thought, to develop some small group studies around specific topics that the congregation would seem important. So we did a survey, got a few answers back, organized 4 specific small groups, which only one made. And that was the prayer group, and it was marvelous. It was just great.
Only had 2 people.
Only had 2 or 3 people come, but that was still great. Those people are still talking about that and want to do it again.
No.
So my question is, in my mind, thought I was sort of sensing the need, filled the call to kind of do something about it. Thought I did a pretty good job of getting feedback from the congregation. And we judged our success very modestly that at least one group made.
Mhm.
Then it sort of died out because I wasn't strong enough to bring it up again the next couple of years. But I am now.
Mhm.
So that's just some feedback. And the question is, what's the timing? And this is not the right timing. We're all too busy this season. So I'll talk to Pastor about it.
I don't know what the question
Well,
is.
I think that is wise. What I like about what you just said was that what you set out to do was not bring in a consultant to tell people how to be better uh, nuts and bolts on the respective committees. You formed prayer groups, you formed small groups built around
Mhm.
spiritual formation. And that really is the core. And that's the way Wesley would have approached it too, is that the nuts and bolts of what we're doing on these committees, that can be trained. But when you're talking about spiritual formation and bringing service oriented character to what we do, that is a deeper transformative work. That isn't just a matter of handing somebody 10 how-to steps and say, here's what you do in the next meeting. You've got to do the work of getting in the seed bed there, and it's going to be an investment, as you say.
Mhm.
Right.
I mean, I've heard stories from pastors. Tom Rayner loves to tell these kind of stories about meetings and people showing up intoxicated at the trustee meeting. And I've never had anything quite as alarming as some of the things Tom Rayner talks about when he sometimes does these little things where he says, share your worst experience in a committee meeting, and he gets all kinds of wild and outrageous tales from the crypt. But I have had some that I have learned from, and most notably that one where I was persuaded that this highly successful person in the community who ran this very prominent business, billboards all over the town, that he would just be ideal to chair our trustee. And that really was a major blow up, and it caused a terrible wound that we need healing from months after it happened. And it all could have been prevented had I, as a pastor, just said very tactfully and sensitively, I don't think that he would be right for this role because I don't know if he has the spiritual maturity yet to be in a leadership role. We can bring him into the church. We can ask his advice. We can always go to him and say, what do you think about what we're doing? And he can tell us. But we don't want to put this responsibility on somebody who does not have the demonstrate. In fact, it was quite obvious that he was spiritually immature, but people just looked over that, excused it, explained it away. And we were all like ostriches, willfully with our head in the sand. And too often, nominations committee can do that. They willfully don't look at the things they need to, simply because they're wanting to fill a role and give their friend a position, or when the mentality needs to be, okay, who are the best, most spiritually mature people? Let's start there, and let's realize we can train the other things, but we've got to have spiritually mature people in these roles. We've got to, and we'll worry about everything else. We'll train them how to balance a checkbook, but the one thing we cannot wait to train is a service basin and towel perspective that they're either going to bring to this, or if they don't have it, it's going to be soon that we see it, and it's going to be potentially hazardous to them and to others if we put them in this role. So that's why I say Wesley started with the integrity qualities first before he started thinking, now, are they good at math? Are they talented at addition and subtraction? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But let's talk about what kind of spiritual person are they? Because they may be a whiz at math, and yet they may be a scoundrel. I don't know if I want them on my finance committee. So that's the bottom line, really.
Steve, my question is more nuts and bolts and not specifically, but I'm having a hard time understanding and visualizing what of this occurs at the local church and charge conference, and what is the relationship of, because when I read through the charge conference, they approve things and choose things, and I, is there some place I can go and look at like a O chart, how all these connections fit together?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and you're right. Charge conference is the that connection between the local church and the annual conference and the church capital C. And that is I just ran one Sunday evening and went through all of this with 4 respective churches, and went down the critical questions about their nominations and about their pastoral salary, um, and basically, when you're at these church conference meetings, who shows up constitutes the quorum. It constitutes the quorum. And you got to tell the church, hey, you don't like the decisions, then you better come up with a better quorum next year, because who shows up at church conference constitutes your quorum. And that is what ultimately gets validated there. So we took roll, and of the 4 churches, they counted down, and each one of them had about a dozen people each there. We had about 50 between the 4 of them. And they may have had more on their council, they may have had less. Most of the time, who shows up for charge conference is your council. That's who should be there, at least. And any retired ministers that you have in your congregation can also be brought there too. Um, but sometimes you have people who aren't even on a committee show up at these charge conferences, and you've got to distinguish and clarify that, who has voting privilege and who doesn't, and who shows up with voting privilege at your charge conference constitutes your quorum, and that will be what ultimately will get validated. It starts with your nominations committee, and then it will then move to the respective committees. And then when you prepare for charge conference, your council will ultimately affirm for the church what they're going to take to charge conference. And by the time you get to charge conference, the work should have already been completed by the individual parish, and in the presence of the presiding elder is where all of this ultimately gets sanctioned, as it were, and you are sent forth with the blessing of the church capital C. And so there are respective orderly ways to do it, but there really is no perfect way, because who shows up for charge conference constitutes your quorum. And unless you go door to door with the cattle prod and say, Joe, you're showing up for charge conference because you belong there. Joe just want to stay home and watch a football game on Sunday evening. He's going to do that. And so if Joe then complains that I don't like what was decided there, then you go back and tell Joe, represent the quorum next year, because who showed up constituted the quorum. And that's the beginning, middle, and end of it, basically. Church council, charge conference, that's your order. And that's it in a simple nutshell. But as I say, it's messy on the level of what constitutes the quorum. I feel sure that of the 4 churches I did Sunday evening, not all the council members were there, but those who were there represented the quorum. And we sanctioned and blessed the 4 churches who were there and sent them forth.
Steve, Kate's had her hand up for a pretty good while.
Yes, let me go to you. What's on your mind this evening?
Yes. So one of the things when you're talking about, having all these councils, the hard part is taking into consideration just how small some of the churches are. Like our church maybe has 20 to 30 people any a given Sunday. And I'm 44 and I'm one of the youngest members. And I'm actually a member because my dad's the pastor and he strapped me in to do some work first. And
Right.
so
Okay.
it's something where sometimes I think, I'm a Christian, so there wasn't an issue of my spirituality. I think he discerned that before. But sometimes you just have to do the work in order to continue to, like, and one of the new rules that we've kind of associated with the church is every time someone has an idea, they've just nominated themselves to run that. Like, if you've got a great idea for a letter writing campaign, guess what? You're in charge of the letter writing campaign. It's not going to be, I've got this great idea, and now Kate or Pastor John or my mom has another job put on their back. Which, yeah, I'm not saying my church does that necessarily, but it's a habit that we have. Especially, like I said, I'm one of the younger members in my mid-40s. And so there's a lot of people that like things to stay the same. But then,
Mhm.
like I started coming because I help do media and we do a lot of songs, and all I do is a kind of nice PowerPoint, but it's completely changed the way the church does their music. But we
Mhm.
had
Mhm.
to because piano players weren't showing up. There's only 2 people in the whole church that can sing. And
Right.
yet, even though I've revamped this whole thing, there are still people that are like, well, when are we gonna start the choir again? And
Right. Right.
and it's the same people that it's like, no offense to them, but I'm hearing them singing behind me, and we don't need to have the choir of 2 people that are just as off key as I am. And so it's real difficult where sometimes you have to I feel like in smaller churches, you're doing the work
Right.
ahead
Right.
of what is sometimes the councils. Like I just joined the church, so I'm able to be on councils. But there's a lot of people that are on councils that they go to council, they agree with something, and then they go home. They're not. They have ideas or they like the way things have been, and then they
Right.
say
Right.
that and
Well,
move on.
you make a good point. And I mean, think about it. If you constructed a nominations committee according to the format of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, that would be more than half of your attending congregation nominating for the other half of your congregation. So, as I mentioned, when we talked about church council, I talked about how churches that are of the smaller variety are going with what is known as the single leadership committee, and it works essentially like a church council with around 12 people on it and doing the things that a church council would do, and uh, serving as a think tank within the larger body where you're recruiting and nourishing and nurturing one another for leadership roles. Um, you brought up another good point that a person may be a member of the church, but not necessarily a member of a committee. But that does not prevent a general church member from not contributing in some meaningful way. It's just that when these respective committees vote, the vote ultimately resides with the nominated people, and that's why representing these committees are essential, is because they're making decisions that carry that kind of delegation. They're representing the interests, and that's the reason we put them into those roles, because we believe they're mature and experienced and have a love for the church, and are going to make decisions in the interest of the church that will benefit us all. But that doesn't render me without a contribution, even if I may not be a member of the respective committee. If you're a person that's attending the church on a regular basis that maybe is not a professing member, even then you would be able to have a contribution. I mean, because you are part of the body, and you have ideas that matter and are valued. But what it comes down to is the nominated people are the delegated representatives that we have entrusted that decision to, and they would ultimately have the voting power. I mentioned when we did charge conference that in some instances you can open up what is called a church conference. And in that instance, you could bring in the wider membership and allow people who aren't on a committee to have vote at those particular conferences. In special instances, like for the sale of property or something that would be so significant that you'd want to draw on the wider contribution of the church as a whole. That's a church conference distinguished from a charge conference. But as I say, even aside from that, you can invite the contributions of people, whether they're on a committee, whether they're a member, any of those things. It just comes down to whether they will, in the end, have a vote in the respective concern that the committee may be addressing. That would then go to the delegates or the representatives that you've nominated. In these smaller church sizes, you operate with a one church committee, one committee plan, and that tends to function well. And a lot of churches find that is successful for what they need and what they do. Basically, you have to find what fits your church dynamic and adapt these things around it. Primarily, you'd be looking for the best that you could afford in terms of faithfulness, integrity, service mindedness, and then you do the best you can with it. And as you say, your choir is a kind of a metaphor for really about everything in the church. A lot of us are singing off key in the trustees meeting. A lot of us are singing off key in the finance meeting. But in time, we hope that we can harmonize the best we are able, and we can grow together and disciple one another. But in the end, we'll never be a Pavarotti, and we're okay with that. But I hope that at least we're moving toward Christ likeness in the way that we are to the highest of our ability. And in the end, that's really what matters above everything else, regardless of what we're doing. That's what matters above everything else. Donna, what are you thinking this evening?
Our church is small as well, and we're blessed that when a position comes open, then it's presented to, well, the congregation that we're in need of someone. We needed someone for finance, and so the request was out, but also we prayed that, individually and as a whole, to have these positions filled by people who have a heart for that and knowledge of that. And so then we got a volunteer who had done finance before, who had was very good with numbers, and some of the other positions has been the same way. People know that we have to have some things like trustees and finance. So people have been willing to, who were qualified, who were, leaders in that area. So we've been blessed that way, but it's a small church as well.
Sure. Yeah. And I know some small churches that tend to function quite effectively, even though they're small in number. The Book of Doctrine and Disciplines is not a straitjacket, never was intended to be. It's not a one size fits all. Rather, it puts forward things that would be in general models that you can adapt to and formulate your church around. But in some cases, you're going to be doing this more in spirit than in structure. And there are many churches across our conference that are your size, and they're finding the best way to operate given what they have available. Um, but what you're encouraging people to do more than anything, and I love what you're saying, is you're encouraging them to pray together. You're encouraging them uh, to unite and harmonize together with spiritual goals shared amongst them. And I think that is a deeply formative and transformative exercise, which is what I think Wesley would say really is the ultimate goal. And how you design it really is less important to the results that it generates. And your prayers and your communal sharing together, that's Ephesians 4. That is exactly what Wesley was wanting to embody, living out the truth of faith that you cultivate in the context of community. Your church is doing that. So what I want to say to all of you is don't be discouraged because you say, well, my church is small. And if you are living out Ephesians 4 to the best of your ability, living out the truth of faith, cultivating that in the spirit of community, collectively coming together to communally form and transform, Wesley would say, you have my blessing, because that is the ultimate goal that we're striving for. It is. Does that cover your concern? Or did you have any follow-up you wanted to add to that?
No, that was it. We just don't fit the mold of the big church and all the committees. There just aren't enough people.
Absolutely. And what the Book of Doctrines and Discipline advises in general is a 9-member community, and that would of course be in addition to the senior pastor, who is the chair of that committee by default, and the lay leader, who is the partner with the senior pastor. And what Wesley advocated was the mutual sharing of pastor and lay, producing a profound, formative and transformative product together. And we have moved from that. And I think Kevin Watson is right on target when he says we have moved from a model of transformation to information, with the pastor serving, whether intentionally or unintentionally, as the in-house expert that renders everyone else into a passive position where they're more spectators and watchers of what the pastor does or recommends or advises, and then they in turn uh, are less invested. And for Wesley, the power that we saw that George Whitefield and Henry Ward Beecher and D.L. Moody found so admirable about Wesley was the way that he categorically and structurally and strategically placed the laity in roles where they would be active, where they would be part of the 8-cylinder engine driving this thing, and not in the passenger seat just riding along. So however many you have, I would say, Donna, your church is bringing that together the best that they are collectively, and they're living out Ephesians 4. And I would say, regardless of your size, that's what you should strive for. Any other of our COLM candidates want to add to or contribute? And I'm going to give Cleve a go at it if no one else has anything. Cleve, what's on your mind this evening, my friend?
Steve, thank you very much. The book, Watching Over One Another in Love, is in the chat link. It is a link to, believe it or not, Walmart. Okay.
Wow, I didn't know they had that.
I didn't know they had it either. Who thought, right? But the book is in Walmart. The link is in the chat room. You can click it on. It will take you to Walmart's homepage, and you can order it, or you can and have it delivered, or you can find out whether your local Walmart has it in stock on their bookshelf. So it is
Yeah,
a great book. It is a direct
it
quote
is.
from John Wesley. Some debated, but he was all about perfect love.
Yes.
Do I get
Yes.
amen from you for that, Steve?
Amen. Yes, you're exactly right. And
Okay.
the book
So,
is a good practical model for churches, whether they're Donna's size or whether they're the size of Pine Valley and Wilmington, whether they're averaging around 700 on a Sunday, like Jim's got. Uh, you can employ all of the guides and the questions and the assessments that are in that book, regardless of how many you have. And if you're coming together like Donna's church, collectively praying together, reflecting
mhm,
together, then you're already bringing that cultivating
mhm,
spirit that Wesley says you
mhm,
need to foster. I mean, having
mhm,
more people doesn't make you more spiritual automatically.
mhm,
You may just have more scoundrels. That's, uh, what you need is the power of connection, more than numerical. Sometimes you're looking at the degree of depth that you have rather than uh, numerical height. You're looking at the
right,
degree of spiritual depth, and so
right.
sometimes that is going to determine the degree of your spiritual height. You don't have the spiritual depth. You don't have the entrenchment that can sustain the winds that blow, and whatever you try to build will be toppled over sooner than later. So cultivate that spiritual depth, build on that. And the book that Cleve has put in the chat room is a wonderful way that you can do that, regardless of what your size may be. Well, it is 7:30. Why don't we take a 5-minute breather, get you a drink, stretch a bit, and we will reconvene at 7:35 for our second session on what is the Staff Parish Relations Committee in the GMC. You'll find there's some interesting things there. I think will spark your imagination and get us thinking in a new direction tonight. So let's stretch a bit and we'll reconvene in 5. Okay, we'll see you then. Right. Welcome back for our second session together. This is the reflection on the Pastor Parish Relations Committee or staff Parish Relations Committee if your church has more than one staff member. Interestingly enough, I'm wondering how many of you have ever served on the PPR SBRC committee. It is a vital undertaking. And the page numbers that correspond to what we're discussing this evening is section 445, right after the nomination section. And it is 50 to 52 in the printable online version that I have printed out, or pages 103 to 108 if you have the hardback seedbed version. But both are under section 445 and have the same content. It's just that the printable book is a little bigger, whereas the seedbed book is a little more compact, which is why it is spread out over more pages. We're going back again to what we talked about that very first night: Christian conversations, Christian conferencing, holy conferencing, the powerful means of grace that Wesley included with Scripture. He included it with the Lord's Supper. He included it with communion. He included it with some fundamental things. You're thinking Christian conferencing along with Scripture and prayer and communion. I mean, how did it ever make that list? Because he saw that it was formative and transformative. Now, once again, we're talking about a group that did not exist in Wesley's day, where we're looking at more as a spiritual kinship more than a exact kind of structure. There was no specific assessment committee that Wesley had in place in the 18th century, but he did advocate between laity and clergy a powerful mutual conversation that he believed that pastors could benefit from and would benefit from. And so there were certainly elements in his organizational model where relational examination was very much interwoven into his consideration. And it's about mutual encouragement, mutual strengthening, mutual nurture, mutual support, mutual accountability. Remember, we're talking about the question that was central for his bands: how is it with your soul? And if the pastor is the only one asking that question to others and nobody's turning that question back to the pastor, Wesley says there is something that's going to be a potential pitfall if the pastor is only asking the question but never having to answer the question himself. And so Wesley had respect and believed that that even though it wasn't a formal performance assessment committee, that there is an intentionality interwoven into this lay feedback that Wesley considered very valuable. Class meetings, leadership accountability, leaders that Wesley had in place. Wesley would often write to others and ask, how are they as a leader? How is their spiritual maturity? How is their spiritual temperament? What is the quality of the package that you're receiving there? Are they maintaining harmony? What is the sense of their overall giftedness that you're interpreting on the receiving end? He was very, very interested about their spiritual maturity. He was very critically minded about their doctrinal alignment, their overall impact in the community. He took great care in asking people and in drawing their feedback. In fact, there was one instance in 1773 in a letter that he wrote to Thomas Rankin, a layperson, where he said, let me know whether your preacher is truly alive to God and whether the preaching is sound, lively, and useful. Wesley asked a layperson for their direct assessment, and he was going to respect their assessment. They told him this pastor is immature, this pastor is not doctrinally correct, this pastor strikes me as a buffoon. Wesley was going to respect that and call that preacher to task to say, what is it that your people are saying about you? What is the account of this? We're looking for vibrant mutuality here between clergy and lay. And so Wesley certainly encouraged that. Wesley uh, gave evidence of it in his own writings, reaching out intentionally to lay people, asking them for their evaluation and for their assessment of what they thought. Now, there, as I say, this wasn't a formalized structural committee, but you do see in spirit character examination, and you certainly see it coming into play early on in the conferences that Wesley conducted early on. In 1744, there was a wonderfully recorded incident where Wesley invited the assessment of lay people that was going to be conducted prior to the conference, where he asked selected questions about those who were aligned with doctrine, whether they showed holiness of heart and life, and he gathered those reports from lay members. And right there, you see in 1744 a precedent that he was setting in place for the power of structured, strategic accountability. Now, ask some pastors, their least favorite church committee, and without compare, they will say the SBRC, because they perceive it in ways that are often negative when it shouldn't be. I am blessed by the SBRC chair that I have in my church. I think she's like Dottie. I believe that she too is not human. I think she is a gift sent to me from above. There is no person that I have in my life other than my wife and daughter right now who is more upbuilding of me, more nurturing, more nourishing. My pastor appreciation day is going to be this Sunday at my church, and I'm already told that my SBRC chair, she is a poet, by the way, she has published works. And she writes me a poetic prayer every year that she has framed. This year will be no different. I'm told she's already written me another prayer in poetic form, and she will read it to me. And it's just so beautiful and moving. And I have these scattered in different places, in my office, in my workroom at home, and it, to me, she just pours encouragement into me. She pours upbuilding into me. She pours nurture and nourishment into me. And SBRC is not designed to be antagonistic. It's not designed to be a place where you meet the hammer and the lash. Wesley drew from these accountable sources, not so the pastors or leaders would feel threatened, but it was a measure of respect for them. I am respecting you enough to dignify you and your work, to show you that your work matters. Your work and what you do matters, and it matters greatly. And what we're doing is we're going to draw some feedback that will enable you to know what you're doing right and how that can serve as an incentive and reinforcement for you. And what are the growing edges that maybe you have blind spots of? You don't see them and you're not aware of them. Isn't it funny? Just I'll say the things that we tend to miss about ourselves that other people see so clearly. I don't know my bad breath, but I get in the room with you and you're going to fall over dead. You know it all too well. There are things I don't see in myself that I am oblivious to. But the people who are nearest to me, that dearly love me and are watching over me, that are going to be respectful enough and forthright enough to say, Steve, here's some things that you can do to clean things up and refine yourself in a way to make your ministry even stronger. We're not looking to reduce you, we're looking to increase you. We're not looking to diminish you, we're looking to advance you. So SBRC done right should not be a time when a pastor feels as if they are belittled, diminished, reduced, a time where they leave the annual assessment and they feel as if they're 2 inches tall. It should be the time where they feel as if I'm formed and transformed. I've been encouraged. My family's been encouraged. They've promoted unity and harmony within me and those around me. They've equipped me. They have provided honest assessment of things that I can do that I'm not aware of. And it helps me to be a better steward of the things that I'm using in my own faith. And it helps me to grow and to advance, not just as a pastor, but as a person and as one in Christ's likeness. People would often write to Wesley. They would write to him individually, directly, and they would tell him of troubling issues of a pastor. They would say, we've got a pastor here whose spirit is contentious. They are more disruptive than holy, and they're creating antagonism in the community. There were cases where Wesley would have to remove a person because of well respected and well reasoned assessments that he would get from lay people that he respected highly. They wrote to him directly, and they would say, we're writing out of deep concern. We've got a person who is acting in troubling ways in our community, and is doing more destructiveness than transformation here. Wesley respected that. And so the SBRC is now a structured committee built along the spirit of what we see Wesley endorsing at conferences like he did in 1744, where he intentionally drew upon the reflections of those who were receiving the work. What are you receiving on your side? What is the quality of it? What is your impressions of it? How does it impact you? Because for Wesley, it mattered to him. Certainly, he was going to ask the pastor their impressions, but he also wanted to hear those who were on the receiving end. What are your impressions? Now, as I say, there are horror stories that abound in many committees, and I've heard horror stories associated with SBRCs, as you have too. Sometimes they turn out to be what they're never meant to be, and pastors are brought into the room, and it turns into a badgering session, and pastors are hurt, congregations are hurt, and people are wounded, and it was never meant to be that. We are imperfect, and as we noted earlier in the last session, sometimes you just have to nominate the best you have available, which means that you may have people that are in the SBRC who maybe aren't the best communicators. They're maybe not the most tactful people that you have available, but they're all you have available, and they don't say things in the way that they meant to say them. And sometimes people don't hear them in the way that they should hear them. But whatever the reason, I've heard a lot of horror stories in 30 years from SBRCs about things that are said, things that are done. And look, if you read the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, SBRC is meant to be an upbuilding arm of the church. It is meant to be a place that bridges congregations and pastors, that is meant to encourage and promote harmony, not disharmony. It is to be the group that attempts to remedy disharmony, to heal and to restore and to reconcile, not be the sources of much disharmony. And sometimes SBRCs can be the source of much woundedness rather than the cure that they should be. They are to be the bridge builders. They are to be the encouragers. They are to be the ones that are protecting, preserving, and promoting harmony in the church rather than being those who reduce it. Now, this is crucial, and I wanted to make sure that I make time for this. In section 445K, page 52 in the printable copy that I have, it says this, that it is recommended to church council to have a written statement of policies and procedures for hiring and dismissing staff personnel. The reason that this is stated in there is because if your church council does not have these written policies in place, then the GMC invests the SBRC with the ultimate authority to hire and fire. They shall have the authority, along with pastors, to hire and fire. Now, some people I have even heard will say, the SBRC let this staff person go. I like that associate, or I like that music leader, or I like that youth leader, and they fired them. My first question turns to 445K and asks, did your church council have a recommendation of written statement of policies and procedures for hiring and dismissing staff personnel? And 100% of the time, they will come back and say, we did not. Well, the discipline gives the SBRC and the pastor the ultimate authority for hiring and dismissing if you do not have written policies in place. So it is highly advisable and urgently encouraged that your churches through council have these written policies and procedures in place. We have them in my church. We invest the SBRC with the power of confidentiality and for their conversations to be conducted in ways that are confidential. And there are some conversations that need to remain there and stay there under lock and key, never to leave that room again. There are other conversations when it comes to ultimate dismissal of people, where those policies that you have will be work in conjunction, in partnership with wider groups in your church. I think it's good to do that, although I understand if you're going to nominate and delegate people that you think are right for the SBRC, then you are investing within them the power to make those kind of decisions. SBRC is no small committee because they are going to make decisions about hiring and dismissing. But if you have a statement of policies and procedures in place, then the SBRC will make recommendations. They will make decisions that will then go back to council, and then they will take those decisions that the SBRC has recommended. And that is a good thing to have in place. And if a statement of policy and procedures to be in place, it gives the church that added level and added dimension that we as a church are going to ensure that we bring levels of checks and balances to this. We understand the SBRC is a critical element to the church in terms of decision making, and so we don't take lightly the people that we nominate to that committee. At the same time, we don't think that we will place upon their shoulders that level of conscionable decisions that if I were on SBRC, I think I would appreciate policies and procedures to say that the hiring and firing was presented to a wider group of people. Checks and balances went through numerous conversations before a decision of this magnitude was reached. And I think that strengthens the church in my humble estimation. Now, if your church just chooses to let the SBRC do that and invest them and wields them with that ultimate power, the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines will bless you. And the Book of Doctrine and Disciplines, outside of 445K, the SBRC will have that authority, along with the pastor, of making hiring and firing decisions of church personnel and staff, unless you have policies and procedures that are written in partnership with church council. My humble estimation, I think that's a wise direction for your church to take, because it just gives one more added level and dimension of checks and balances. I would encourage you to read section 445K, because if your church ever has had to fire someone, in my 30 years of ministry, I am fortunate to say I have never, ever had to fire a staff member. I've never had to. And I'm grateful for that. I hope I never have to. That would not be an easy decision. And I certainly have to sympathize with anybody who's had to make those kind of decisions. I know they don't come easily. I know they don't come lightly. And I know they weigh heavily on a church, even when the dismissals are deserved. I know that it's a great, painful thing that happens. I don't know how many of you have ever been a part of things like that. I don't know how many of you have been on the receiving end of things like that. But as you can attest, we would be wise and we would be prudent to put into place as many measures of checks and balances to make that decision less of a burden on the respective people whose shoulders have to carry it, when sometimes those things have to be faced. They're unfortunate, but sometimes the reality is, in the world we live in, that sometimes people have to be dismissed. Book of Doctrines and Disciplines gives that power and invests that power in the Staff Parish Relations Committee, unless you write policies and procedures in partnership with church council. My humble estimation, I encourage you to do that. I strongly do. Well, there's more that we can say, but I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to open it up to you, and we're going to go ahead and take our remaining time for reflection. What's leaping out at you? Did it surprise you to hear that Wesley intentionally reached out to lay people, that he intentionally drew upon their contributions, particularly before conferences like in 1744 and in his letter to Thomas Rankin in 1773? He was intentional in reaching out to lay people for their contributions of their assessment of pastors and preachers. Some people are surprised to hear that. What's your thoughts this evening? Anything leaping out at you? Dottie, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that one of the things that we need to keep in mind is the third letter of that acronym for what it is, relation. And, it is a relationship between the pastor and other staff members and the congregation. And it's just like our relationship with Jesus, it can be tumultuous at times, but, the ultimate goal is for it to be kind and loving.
It's exactly right. And one pastor recently told me that in their SBRC assessment, they were told, many find your preaching boring. Well, I think there are more tactful ways. I mean, even if they are, you know, not as engaging as you would prefer the preaching to be, if we're going to be relational, as you just intimated, then we need to find a better descriptive way that we use our language. We can say, some people, Steve, are suggesting that maybe we can work together in uh, increasing the effectiveness of your engagement in your preaching style and helping you become more engaging. Uh, Not to just use blunt force language like that. It really hurt the pastor's feelings, and uh, things like that. Simple things that happen in the SBRC room where the relation part is less than what it needs to be. We're meant to be upbuilding. We're meant to be encouraging, and we can assess people. I mean, unless they're doing something intentionally that's bringing harm on the community. Wesley would say we need to guard our language better than that, and we just don't need to come at people as 2x4s between the eyes. We can be more Christian in our language. How would we want people to approach us? Let's just begin there. Would we want people to say it a little more tactfully? Uh, Simple things like that. And I think that's why, this book, Watching Over One Another in Love, it's a simple book that just gives wonderful counsel on how to couch the language around these kind of things, how to be assessing but encouraging simultaneously. It can be done. And God's grace can give us the wisdom to do it and to do it effectively. But I think it really doesn't require a lot of rocket science just to simply think, do as you would be done by. I mean, if you were on the receiving end, what would impact you and move you and be compassionate to you? That's the way it should be conducted. But sometimes it's just lacking of refinement and just blunt force trauma that comes out of a lot of SBRCs when it really shouldn't be that way. If we respected that third letter, relations, then everything else would fall into place. I mean, that's really the essence of it. You're right. It is the essence that holds everything else together. Have any of you heard some horror stories about SBRC? No doubt you have. Any of you have one you'd like to share? One that would be a good case study for us this evening?
I was just going to say one quick one, Steve, that a friend who's in charge of the SPRC committee at her church has had 2 or 3 people in the congregation come and say that the minister looks at his wife too many times during the service. And, and it's trivial stuff like that probably, unless it was just, where the attention is the entire time, doesn't even really need to be addressed. But sometimes the complaints that people have are absolutely that trivial.
Well, they are. And another one that I heard, North Carolina is a hodgepodge, is it not? I mean, we have numerous accents all in one geographical space. And I'm amazed at how people in the same town can speak more Southern and you have degrees of that Southern twang to people's voice here in North Carolina. And I appreciate it. I do. In fact, when I came from Asbury, I don't know of anybody that has a more Southern twang than my hero, Maxie Dunham. Have any of y'all ever heard Maxie Dunham? What a man. Oh, he's one of my heroes. Hi, I'm Maxie, and I'm president of Asbury Seminary. I mean, I love him. I love the guy. And yet somebody told me that in an SBRC meeting, they have a more pronounced Southern accent like Maxie. And their SBRC told them, some people find you way too Southern for their taste. Well, I would say in North Carolina, you'd better get over that because, I mean, we live among it. I mean, what else you going to say? We have degrees of it. We're a smelting pot. If we don't know that by now, we have a hodgepodge, and there are degrees of it, some less so, some more so. And I have found Southern preachers, I mean, Will Willimon, I used to really appreciate him until he went off the rails. He's another Southern preacher. I used to listen to him before he went crazy. I liked listening to Southern preachers, and I can listen to just about anybody's accent. It doesn't bother me at all. Some people, though, they have a proclivity where some accents really just seem to grate them and chafe them in ways that they just can't seem to get around it. And they just told this poor person, we can't get around your Southern accent. Some people find you too much of a Southern accent. See, that's I think that is another untactful way that we are not really focusing on essentials, and really we got to cross check ourselves before we do an assessment and think, is this worthy? Is this something that belongs in the assessment? Or are we saying more about ourselves than we are them? Because this triviality bespeaks of something that is not good. It reveals some shallowness on our part, that says more about us than it does who we're supposedly assessing. We're assessing ourselves by our own language indirectly. So I mean, those kind of things. I hear it all the time, and it's unfortunate. In my 30 years, I've got to say that I have. Well, I don't know if I've told you this or not. I've only been in 3 churches in my 30-year career, and I'm honored to say that I've been the longest standing pastor in all 3 churches historically. I was the longest standing pastor in all 3 churches in their entire history. And that says one of two things. Either I'm lovable or people put up with me. I don't know. Either one of the two. I'm easy to be put up with, or they find me charming. I don't know. But I'm fortunate that I have never been on the receiving end of this horrendous kind of treatment at SBRCs. I've never had it before. And I hear it all the time. People telling you, I don't like the way you look at your wife, or I don't like your Southern accent, and these are just hurtful things. They really are. And it's just not productive. And nobody gains. Nobody gains. The pastor certainly doesn't, and the congregations don't either. That's why reading a simple little 80-page book like this one that Cleve put the link for is just a wonderful work of information to help guide you in the proper way to couch your terminology. And just read it if you have to guard yourself and protect yourself from going off script, to ensure we're not going to talk about things that are trivial or uh, superficial. We're going to focus on what is critical and what is relational and upbuilding. And you will all be better served by doing that. Joyce, what's on your mind this evening? Is your audio on?
I had a question about policies and procedures. You said it is advisable to have them. When I first started on PPR, I ended up writing a couple of job descriptions, but we really don't have policies. Is there a place, instead of rewriting or trying to create the wheel, is there an example or a place where I could get maybe some guidance
Oh,
on?
yeah. Oh, sure. And they're abundant. They really are abundant. And I hear churches all the time say they just Googled it. They Googled it, and you can get wonderful resources that way. There are some even samples in the Watching Over One Another in Love book. Job descriptions are a very good place to start, and ensuring some consistency too, because it's kind of fascinating to me that I saw one of these recently for a church that was hiring a part-time youth minister that they were going to pay like 10,000 a year. And they had a 2-page job description for him that looked like somebody that was going to be getting a consultant job with SpaceX. I thought, we got to be reasonable here. We got to be reasonable. We got to tailor
Yeah,
our
thank you.
job descriptions around what would be compatible with the job, right? And I think sometimes in our job descriptions, they are not compatible for what the pay scale would represent. And in that sense, we've got to be very cautious that we're looking at models that would be consistent. And that's why I think it helps to do just a little research. In today's uh, technology driven world, it is so easy to do because they're so abundant. People can print off 3 or 4 job descriptions, and you can cross compare them and look at the various salary ranges of them too, to ensure that the salary range or the salary package that your church is offering is tailoring a job description compatible in a just and prudential way that would be equitable for what the compensation would be. Um, but I think doing that in conjunction with church council is very wise. Drafting those and putting those together, and by doing a little research, you can come up with some really good models to follow. That'll be very helpful for you.
I think one of the bigger questions I have is we don't have anything about when you might dismiss or how to do that, and there's nothing in place. And we've had one experience with a person, and so I would like to have something in place. And do you think there's something out there I could probably find on that too?
I mean, basically, you would use your job description as that assessment tool, that a source of accountability that you would then use as your measure. And what you would do is then say that you would have policies and procedures in place where, like any other institution or organization, I mean, there are various uh, maneuvers that they go through, and you, for instance, would be invited in if you were excessively tardy for work, or if you uh, failed to accomplish a task for which was part of the requirements of your job. Well, then you would be brought in and you would be advised to ensure that you were informed of this, and that would count as a verbal uh, kind of warning about it, and you would have a chance to conform. You'd have a chance to get an alignment. It would happen again, and the chronic lateness is not corrected, or the neglect of a duty is not improved. Well, then you would then have a higher level where maybe the person would be brought in not just before the pastor but before the SBRC, and then they would be asked, you were told about this, they might get a second chance. And depending on your policies and procedures, as Robert, my friend, the former college dean I was telling you about, it all flows out of a well-written job description. Robert, where are you, my friend? I saw your name just now. Where is my friend? There you are. Robert, help us out here. Former college dean here.
Well, also I came from the corporate world. And again, if you ever get into a situation where you have conflict and, and let's say it would go into a legal matter, well, hopefully we wouldn't have that in our churches. But the first thing somebody's going to ask is, do you have a well-written job description? And whenever you evaluate someone, even to the point of, your minister, how do you evaluate them? Well, you look at the duties and responsibilities, and are they doing those things that are in writing? And if they're not, you may ask them, what are you doing beyond the job description? Because every year you can find that they're doing a lot of things that's not captured on that job description. But, if you want to keep yourself out of trouble and be able to do this very objectively, you need a well-written job description. And beyond what Steve had said, two other resources. One, and I haven't looked at it in many years, but it used to be the Dictionary of Occupational Job Titles. You could check there. And then also at times I just go out to Google and say, AI, artificial intelligence, help me this. And even when I filled in at church and have tried to write prayers, I'll just say, AI, I would like a prayer as it relates to the offering or whatever. So there's some other resources, but well-written job descriptions are key.
Yeah, I didn't think of AI.
You're absolutely right. Thank you, Robert, for that. It really is, and as he points out wisely, that they're always adapting. I mean, here in the GMC, I can tell you right now that since we became GMC, the things I do day to day, week to week, month to month have changed dramatically. Sometimes it seems like they're changing moment by moment, where I'm asked to do something else I'm needed in some other capacity for the district, for the conference. I mean, because think about it, the GMC tries to limit apportionments. And so what we're doing is formally what the UMC did with a large multiple bureaucracy, and we're doing it primarily and predominantly with volunteers. And so I can tell you my daily and weekly responsibilities have changed dramatically. And they tell me quite humorously, you should be giving about 5 to 10 hours a week to CLM. Okay, 5 to 10, huh? Is that what I should be doing? To be the academic dean of this thing? Yeah. And then, leading the charge conference, doing all the things that I do within the district itself, 5 to 10 here, 5 to 10 here. I'd be working 90 hours a week if I did everything they said I should be doing. Robert is right. I mean, we are adapting, and we've got to continually revisit for the people that we're going to be ultimately holding to their feet to the fire. If we're going to be assessing them, we need to be accurate with what we're assessing them with. It's certainly not fair to hold them to standards that they have not been communicated clearly of. And I hear horrendous stories. I do, about SBRCs and people who feel like they've been let go for things that they weren't well informed about, or and then the top one that pastors often hear is, you're not visiting enough. And you're thinking, well, how should I visit, and who should I visit, and how many hours a week should I devote to this? That's usually the top criticism that pastors hear, and that's usually the one that comes back at them, is that you're not visiting enough. And one wise person that I heard that had a very interesting comeback to that is that, in what way are you contributing to the outreach and visiting of the wider needs of the congregation? Because I can tell you right now, the needs of the congregation are too vital and they're too critical for one person. And right now, here we go, is as Kevin Watson pointed out, we are seeing the byproduct in the SBRC of the failure of professionalism in clergy, that creates a passive congregation that is uninvolved, and they're inactive, and they are not formative and transformative. If they were practicing social holiness and spreading scriptural holiness throughout the land, then they would realize the pastor is not the one-stop shop for doing all the visiting. And before I say you need to visit more, I might need to cross-check myself and think, who can I visit? Who can I pick up the phone and call? Who can I send an encouraging letter to? When I was on the lay side of this, and seeing it from the other side, I think it was sometimes unreasonable for congregations to expect the pastor to do everything and give them the excuse to remain disengaged and uninvolved. And in that instance, the pastor would say, I'm not failing you as a visitor, but indirectly, I may be failing you as a discipler. So I'm going to take your criticism of my not visiting enough indirectly to say that might not be true, but what may be true is I'm not discipling you enough to do what you should be doing. I become too professional, and I become too papal, and I become too much of one who thinks that you sit and watch. And I've got to cross-check myself there. So sometimes one criticism may be an implicit reminder of the real criticism that lies underneath it. And I think it's wise to discern that sometimes these criticisms that you don't visit enough are really an indirect indictment to say, maybe I need to improve my discipling, because if there's a visitation void, I'm not going to say I'm going to increase my visitation time before I say I'm going to increase my discipling time. I'm going to do you a favor to dignify you with the joy and privilege of being a disciple, and give you the privilege of coming off the sidelines and into the front of the stage where you're meant to be. So I don't know. I think some of our criticisms are really implicit and indirect reflections of another kind of criticism that Kevin Watson says ultimately comes down to excessive professionalism that is no longer discipling. And then it comes out in the SBRC assessment that you're not living up to your professional expert status. Well, I was never meant to be that in the first place. So maybe we're discovering that together. Dottie, what is on your mind this evening?
Well, I was just going to make a comment. There was a joke out a while back about a pastor that was being interviewed by a church on, possibly coming there, and they had different ideas, the SPRC committee, on what he needed to do. So he asked them to list the duties that they thought that he should cover and the amount of hours they thought he should spend each week doing them. And when they totaled them all up, it was more hours than there are in a week. So the man wouldn't have been
Right.
able to sleep or anything, and it is a joke, but it is closer to the truth than what we'd like to think.
Is and that's why I say I've heard about the part-time pastor who was going to be paid 10,000 a year, who had a job description that looked like he was going to be an engineer for Tesla. And I thought, we got to be more realistic. We really do. And that goes for pastors too. I think that, we lay down a description for them sometimes that uh demands that they be more than what any human being can be. And I think Kevin Watson really nails the central problem that he sees as a predominant source of erosion in our churches, is the disproportionate expectation of clergy professionalism that has rendered the power of Wesley's lay empowerment uh, passive, and it's made it more ineffective than it was meant to be. Uh, as Whitfield and Moody and Beecher recognized the genius of Wesley, his impact, his single most important impact in their estimation, aside from everything, was the way that he strategically mobilized the laity and drew upon them. He respected their insights. He dignified them to say, your contribution matters and you are on the receiving end. You are on the receiving end, and we want to draw from what you're thinking, and we want to utilize it in our growth and in our advancement and increase. So Wesley was unique in that. As I say, the SBRC is certainly not representative of his time in spirit, but not in structure. But what was representative of his time was intentional, uh, interwoven lay feedback into the way that he conversed with his clergy, and the way that he attempted to provide encouragement to them and constructive ways to help build them and nourish them into improvement in every way, not just as a preacher, but as a person and as one growing in Christ likeness. Because really, the ultimate question is, how is it with your soul, and how are you moving toward perfection? And anything that can help you do that better in terms of watching over one another in love, Wesley utilized it, and he attempted to employ it strategically as a way to encourage growth. Dan, what's on your mind this evening, my friend?
I have a question here.
Hey, Steve, this is Allison here with Daniel. My question, I'm going to take us way back to when we were talking about the concerns of the congregation, and a lot of the concerns coming as what were perceived as trivial concerns. And that a former administrator working in the educational field for 30 years. So how does the GMC view the SPRC's role in receiving those concerns, and those concerns not needing to go to the pastor, but needing to be addressed because they can't just fall on deaf ears? as moving those concerns to the lay leader or the lay person in the church to go back to the complainant to be addressed.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're bringing up an interesting point. And sometimes an issue may appear somewhat insubstantial. Let's put it that way. But then there may be cases where what seemed insubstantial may very well be pertinent. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is I've heard churches before complain, whether the pastor was male or female, about their attire, that they didn't dress professional enough, and they would criticize them for it. You don't dress professional enough, and sometimes that may be somewhat trivial. Until I heard of a pastor, this is true, and I substantiated it, who showed up to do a funeral wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Now, unless this was an outdoor beachside kind of memorial, that would be one thing, but that was not it at all.
Mhm.
It showed a sense of just unawareness of decorum at best, and at worst, just totally oblivious to being just respectful. And people were appalled. People were appalled. And so I would say that, if a person went into the SBRC and they would say, Steve, you don't dress professional enough. We don't find you adequate or sufficient in your attire. Well, we might think that that might be trivial. Do we want to put that in the job description? That when you apply here, you better have a good wardrobe. But then in some cases, I mean, what you're saying is very wise, because in some cases, when you get someone like the guy that showed up at the funeral in a Hawaiian shirt, who just showed, complete oblivion to decorum, then it's not trivial at all. And somebody would need to take this person aside and say, brother, sister, that was not the best wise thing you could do in that situation. So some things that may not fit at first glance on a job description. That's one case in point that I think would serve as a good example, that in the majority of cases might strike us as trivial, but in some cases we'd say that's not so trivial at all.
Right.
That's a case. So I think what you're asking is very wise, and I guess it was just, I don't know what to say other than it's a case by case basis. Who was it
And-
wise? Or it says if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. I mean, sometimes you
And-
just have to look at it and say it's going to be a case by case basis.
Right. And part of what I'm saying is more of rather, and I guess my choice of words was not accurate in that to be addressed would not be the right way, but maybe more of a investigative nature for the lay minister or the lay leader or the lay person. And that usually what I have found in my background is that when something comes in that way, that there's always an underlying issue. That if somebody were to come and say, I don't like the way and I'm going to use a church setting, I don't like the way the minister, and I'll use, is dressing, then it's not usually the way the minister is dressing, that there's something else going on. It's not really that issue. So you don't take it to the minister because it's the way he's dressing. So we think it's trivial at the surface, but maybe the lay leader or the lay person can go to the complainant and kind of find out the underlying issue. So, okay,
Mm.
so we get this complaint from you, or we understand that you've got an issue with what's going on with the way the minister is dressing, but just kind of do their thing with what really is going on and find out what is really going on to see if there really is a valid complaint or if this is just something else. Because usually that's what I have found before it's taken to the minister to say, hey, look, we got an issue with somebody saying the way you dress, kind of thing, because that could root out whether it really is an issue and that person didn't have the words to verbalize what is really going on.
Yeah, that is true. And sometimes, it's a difficult thing. I heard of a case now that you bring it up, church did not put dress code in their job description. And this is a case that I heard about, and it's kind of legendary that a pastor, female pastor, would often go out socially braless. And some members of her congregation found that unbecoming. They found it unbecoming. And she was seen on a number of occasions out socially, not during work hours, braless. And the congregation wondered how they would address it and confront her over this particular issue, obviously delicate as it is. The SPRC chair, being male, found it something that he didn't feel comfortable bringing up with her. And it was an awkward thing to attempt to navigate. But you bring up certainly an interesting situation here. In some cases, you may be dealing with some areas of concern that don't fit so neatly into every dot and tittle of the job description, and yet reflect the entire identity of the one whose job description it is, if I might put it that way. If I might say so, I think as a pastor, going braless out socially is probably not wise. That's my humble estimation. I would not want my daughter to do that if she were a pastor, and especially in widely attended public places. But that was the issue, and it's somewhat of a nice case study for things like we're talking about here. But I've heard so many things. I've heard churches complain because their pastor smelled like coffee breath. I've had some say that their pastor had BO. I've had some say that they didn't like the particular way that the pastor decorated their office. They didn't like their decor. One had Star Wars paraphernalia in his office, and that offended people. They didn't like the fact they had a Darth Vader helmet in his office, and that rubbed some people wrong. Things like that. I've heard the complete spectrum of things that you might say sometimes typically would fall under that category of triviality. But then in other cases, you may say, well, that's not trivial at all. It doesn't fit under the exact job description, but yet something about the overall identity does apply to it as a whole in some unspoken way. So again, I think it's just case by case wisdom that we have to come as Christians and navigate these issues when there really isn't a definitive way to nail it down, because sometimes it's going to be absolutely trivial. And then other times it may be pertinent.
And does GMC see that as being just the decision of the SPRC to kind of take it that way? Is that just kind of like a blessing?
Oh, yeah.
To be
well, you see
given
the
to
section
them?
in the GMC. It's the GMC discipline for the Pastor Parish Relations Committee is 3 pages. And you're talking about the enormous responsibility that group has. And yet there's a lot that just remains unspoken that just comes back to having people there that are generally wise, that can navigate these issues, and they're people, as Dottie pointed out, relational. They can think relationally. They can think as friends. They can think as mutual upbuilders. They can think as people who are on the road together as partners in Christ likeness. We're wanting to assist each other and watch over one another in love. And so if I'm doing things that are unbecoming or tactless, showing disregard for decorum, uh, I think there are ways we can share with one another as friends and lovingly, uh, without just coming at each other, with blunt force trauma. And that just takes wisdom. And so when you're nominating these SBRC, it really is people that are going to be walking that tightrope. And that's why we want this bridge to be one that you'd be willing to cross over. We talk about some of the world's dangerous bridges and, attempting to drive over them. And do you want to drive over a bridge that's wobbly? That's why when I'm going to nominate my SBRC people on that nominations committee, I don't want wobbly people that I'm going to have to cross over one day. I want people who are going to be sturdy and steady when you need them the most. And not everything's going to be in black and white, but you can count on them to be sensitive in their reflections, and they're going to be people who are deeply spiritually reflective and in tune with wanting to please Jesus. And that's going to guard and it's going to inspire all that they do. They may make mistakes, but they will be the first to admit it if they do.
Thank you.
Janice, what are you thinking of this evening? And we'll let Janice close us out, since we are getting to the end of our evening together. Let me say it's been a pleasure. Y'all have asked a lot of interesting questions, and that's what this is all about. So I thank you for that. Janice, we're going to give you the curtain call tonight. What's on your mind?
Well, Cameron actually really wanted to say something. He just had to step out real quick. But what he was saying was, you kind of stepped on his toes a little bit, because he and I've actually been having this conversation lately and about visiting. And we have seen this in our church used to be in a charge with the UMC. And in that charge, we shared a pastor with 3 churches most of my life, and then it narrowed down to 2 churches. And we had a pastor that had back surgery, and people started complaining that he hadn't done enough visiting, and they were making a lot of complaints about everything. And they pushed this man, and he wasn't even released by his doctor to return to work, but he was pretty much told, you've got to do these funerals, because he had people that died during this time frame that he was supposed to be laid up in the bed. And so it really put a lot of pressure on him at a bad time in his life. And it led him, I feel like it led him away from the ministry completely. He's no longer a pastor. He ended up losing his family after all of it. And we really sent that man down a long road with drug addiction, which was probably from pain pills, because of having to push through at a time that he shouldn't have been doing that. And I feel like that was a failure on the part of our PPRC at that time, which was a charge PPRC. So there was members of our church and members of the sister churches on that committee together. And I feel like them pushing him that way really destroyed his life. And when I served on the PPRC, the last time that I served, I was still on a charge with another church. And it is a little bit harder when there's 2 churches and 2 different kinds of bodies of people that were sharing that evaluation of a pastor and all of those things. But when you said tonight, it's the laity that needed to step up more about visiting and doing things. We do ask too much, especially at our church, of our pastors, because we aren't able to pay a full-time pastor. We've always had student pastors who were part-time pastors. So Cameron said it's stepping on our toes, because here we were saying that to ourselves even, and that's being addressed now at our church, because we just decided to create a care team, and actually they asked me to be the chair of that. So Cameron and I will be moving forward, but we've asked the last 2 pastors, can we go visit with you to show you where everybody lives, and and none of them ever took us up on that offer to go with them, but we never took our initiative to go on our own.
Well, you bring up really, I think, the cure, and it ties into what I talked about with Kevin Watson, that he's put his finger on what I think is a critical issue. And it tends to be an issue in Orthodox churches, Bible believing churches, churches like the Global Methodist churches that disaffiliated. We have slipped into, unknowingly and unintentionally, professionalism. And when I hear the criticism, you don't visit enough, I'm thinking, well, that isn't true. But I have failed in another way. I haven't discipled enough. That criticism actually is the indirect revelation of what I really am not doing, because I should be discipling you, and I should be raising you up, and I should be linking arms with you for us to be partners in this enterprise. This endeavor is too much for one. I'm going to dignify you by allowing you to enjoy the privilege of your high calling. And I'm not going to take that from you by multiplying the work that you could be doing in your calling. And so I think that whenever I'm asked, can we go on with you on this visit? I'd never decline somebody. I say, if you're asking that, that means the Lord has laid that passion on you, and I am going to embrace it. I do invite people to go with me, and I have visitation teams in every church that I've ever been in. And I've had wise people counsel me. I'm not that clever. I've just had some wise people advise me, and I've taken their advice. And they've told me from the very beginning, visitation will be your ticking time bomb. It will be what kills you. And so here's the way you can do some preventive medicine on the front end. Construct visitation teams wherever you go. Make sure that's the first order of business. And if you're going to build all these other committees, then the first thing you need to do, in addition to nominations, SBRC, trustees, finance, is build a visitation team and employ them and empower them. Take them out with you so they can see how it's done. And then let them go like Jesus sent out those in Matthew 10. Go out and come back and tell me the joy that you had in seeing the good things God does through you. And so build that up and encourage people and disciple them in the way where that will be a shared endeavor. And it will remove pressure that pastors often put on themselves. There's the pressure that we carry that we should never be carrying, but it's more a symptom of our lack of discipling, and not something that we're doing nobly in the interest of the kingdom. And so I think Kevin Watson, you talk about having your toes stepped on, that book steps on my toes when he realizes that a large part of the difficulties that we're having in our church are not because we lack the resources. It's because pastors have unintentionally or unknowingly placed themselves in positions where they are the in-house experts. And that implicitly kind of translates into a passivity where people become more spectators, and that will happen. And then the criticisms will then come. You need to be doing more because you're the expert. And when if I had addressed it on the front end to say, I'm not the in-house expert, we are partners together in the gospel, and you're as much a part of this kingdom enterprise as I am. And that would relieve us of some of those problems. If you're going to criticize me for the right thing, not because I haven't visited enough, but tell me the blunt force truth. You haven't discipled enough. And that is a symptom of the underlying true problem. Well, more could be said, but we're not going to solve all the problems in one night. I'm going to ask my friend Robert Leslie to close us out with prayer tonight. Brother, send us forth with the blessing.
Okay, let us pray. Dear God, thank you for this opportunity to learn more about what's going on in our churches. We just ask that you bless our churches and bless all of our leaders. And we truly believe everyone in the church is a leader and can be a leader. But we just ask that you bless us as we continue to learn about what we're supposed to be doing. And we just ask that you bless our leaders. We ask that you continue to bless Steve and all he gives us each week and all that he shares with us, and also the others that weigh in with great questions and also great insights into what we're trying to learn. And God bless us as if we're traveling this evening, and just bless us in every way that we can open up and learn more about your word and what you want us to know, so we can lead our churches. In your son's name, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Well, when we look forward to next week, we'll be looking at trustees and finance, which are Wesley on stewardship. Now, that's essentially what it is. Wesley was a strong advocate of stewardship. I'm going to send you 3 sermons that tie in nicely to this theme. But I'm going to ask my brother Cleve, because I know he is a storehouse of wonderful resources. Brother, if you've got some good stuff on Wesleyan stewardship, let's dig it out. Let's dig out the archives, because that's what we'll be looking at next week on caring for finances and caring for property. Again, we're looking at things that are unique from Wesley. Wesley didn't have trustee committees or finance committees, but Wesley did prioritize urgently the practice of stewardship. And that is exactly what trustees and finance are doing. They are stewards. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on next week. I look forward to exploring that with you. That will be our concluding session together. So I hope we can end it strong. Be blessed, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.